Good morning, or good afternoon, or even good noon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing about the war. As I mentioned, I know that I haven't posted the first episode of the war, and since the war was, the writing on the subject of the war is pretty long, so we're going to this video probably will be a 1 to 2 parts, but 1 to 2 parts maybe, depending on how much I get done and read. But other than that, let's get into the war. Fisher gathered his force of 111 soldiers and marched their way to Bulgaria and Ketchup as quick as they could. On Friday, July 5th, 2024, at 11:09 a.m. in the morning, the Tanarian fleet encounters the Tanarian and Bassagian ships blocking their path to Budapest, and quickly the Battle of the Bassagian Channel began. Both ships fought for a few minutes, and it resulted with both Italian and Bassagian ships sinking into the sea, which a number of casualties from both destroyed vessels were 22 Italians and 20 Bassagians. The Tanarian fleet have also lost one ship with 20 sailors dead. The admiral of the Tanarian fleet, Admiral Yigit Demir, reported to Mustafa about the situation. He told Mustafa that they encountered the Italian and Bassagian naval vessels and sunk them, but they had lost one ship. Mustafa was angered that he lost one ship, but he was proud of Egypt for sinking their ships and managed to save some of his invading forces. But now their plan has to change because Mustafa knew if they continued to sail towards Budapest, they would give their enemies enough time to be prepared. Mustafa ordered Egypt to cancel their trip to Budapest and start landing troops on Egypt. Egypt agreed to Mustafa's orders and told his fleet to change their course for Egypt. When General Fisher's forces reached Bulgaria, they heard the news that both Italian and Bassagian ships were sunk by the Tanarian fleet, and it could be any moment when the Tanarians would change their course to land. Fisher immediately ordered a small unit of men to walk to Egypt to help them defend their positions, while he and the rest of the unit would help Bulgaria. On Saturday, July 6, 2024, at 9:41 a.m., the soldiers that Fisher sent to Ketchup had arrived and immediately got to the positions along with the rest of the Egyptian defenders, waiting anxiously for the Tanarians to arrive. The Tanarian ships were seen along the northern coast, and at around 10:44 a.m., Tanarian soldiers and tanks landed on the northern shoreline of Egypt and advanced towards the Bassa-Egyptian defense, for which the Bassagians and Egyptians released artillery and gunfire upon the Tanarians, and in return, the Tanarian tanks and soldiers fought back. As the battle continued, the Tanarian forces had lost both of their tanks and a lot of infantry, so in desperation, they called their battleships to bombard the shoreline. As the Tanarian ships were loading their guns, the Bassagian and Egyptian soldiers quickly retreated, leaving the defense open. When the Tanarian soldiers saw this, they told their navy to call off the bombardment since they were running away. A small unit of soldiers captured the defense due to the threat of using their navy on the enemy, but they need more men to help hold the position. The leader of the small unit, Lieutenant Ashra Selinam, called Solomon Mustafa to request for some reinforcements, which Solomon responded saying that he would be sending soldiers and naval support from Budapest, which will take them 5 hours to get there. And as they are on their way, he would call for their navy to come back to the home country to send more troops, supplies, air and armor support, which for them to get to their home country and back will take 2 days. The Kandaharians have finished setting up their defenses within their colonies and have decided to send troops to Fisher and the Bulgarians. The Italians decided to send a small unit of armor and infantry to help the Egyptians fight the Tanarians. As for Bassagia and Bulgaria, they started to send their troops to Aplastica to aid their allies. After 5 hours of waiting, the Budapestian fleet and infantry arrived. Lieutenant Ashra wanted to attack the Egyptian arsenal at Fort Mesa, but due to the number of men he has, they could be defeated easily, so he decided to focus on another Egyptian arsenal located at Fort Tibuar. He wanted his men and the Budapestians to sleep because in 2 days they would launch their attack. The Grataalians had made it to Kejpt and were split into 3 divisions. One was sent to Fort Tibuar, while the other 2 divisions were sent to Fort Mesa and Tiblir. The Tanarians have also arrived in Bulgaria and began reinforcing Bulgaria's defenses. Passaja and Bulgarian troops have arrived to their colonies and began marching their way towards the north. As for Admiral Yujit's fleet, they have arrived to their home country and are now taking the time to refuel and load the ships with more reinforcements. On Tuesday, July 9th, 2024, at 12:19 p.m., Ashra and his allied division snuck into the oasis close to Fort Tibuar, where they would set up their ambush. The Budapestians and a few of Ashra's men spread it out along the tree line, ready for their command, but not until their Budapestian light artillery crew was finished setting up their cannons, facing the defense along the fort's walls. After the Budapestians set up their artillery, Ashra gave the command to open fire. The soldiers within the fort were a mix of Grataalian, Basajan, and Egyptian regiments that were ordered to protect the fort and a small arsenal of weapons and ammunition. When the soldiers heard Budapestian cannons opening fire along the fort and their defenses, they hurriedly grabbed their weapons and manned their positions, returning fire along the tree line to suppress the enemy from reaching the fort. Ashra and the allied forces fought with each other for about 40 minutes, and both sides were taking casualties, especially the mixed units within the fort. Fort Tibuar, now with only 22 men guarding the arsenal, had decided to surrender the fort because they were outwitted by the Budapestian light artillery and Ashra's quick-moving tactics. Ashra and the remaining survivors of his unit captured 9 Grataalian, 8 Egyptian, and 5 Basajan soldiers as prisoners. Now with the fort under Ashra's control, the remaining soldiers would rely on the small supply of ammunition for a couple more days. Ashra would call Solomon, telling him of his success of capturing one of the Egyptian forts, along with some prisoners for them to interrogate or hold hostage, in which Solomon was pleased. Ashra also asked him about the reinforcements he requested, and Solomon responded saying that half of the troops would be sent to their location while he ordered the other half to invade Bulgaria, and when she said would arrive by tomorrow, and the ships sent to Bulgaria would be there within 2 days. On Wednesday, July 10th, 2024, Lieutenant Ashra had received his units and wanted them to wait until they heard word of their status in Bulgaria. On Friday, July 12th, 2024, at 9:32 a.m., the Tanarian ships have arrived along the shores of Bulgaria and began sending their soldiers to invade the beachhead. The allies who are defending the beachhead were ready for them to arrive. Tanarian tanks and infantry landed on the shore and pushed towards the allied defense while being shelled by artillery fire. As the tanks continued to push, they opened fire, destroying a few barricades of barbed wire and 2 light artillery pieces, which caused 2 of their light tanks to be destroyed. Then the allies fired their heavy artillery upon the heavy Tanarian tanks, which caused them to be destroyed as well. Now with all the tanks demolished, the infantry began to spread out looking for cover, and once they found cover, they returned fire. As the firefight pursued for another few minutes, the allied forces of the first line were losing heavy casualties. When the first line was defeated, the Tanarians began to rush for the second defense. The second defense line held for a while until a sudden unfortunate event happened. As the men were defending their ground, General Fisher of the Basajan Colonial Corps would be shot by a Tanarian soldier. As the men saw the body of General Fisher, the morale wavered, and due to their forces losing casualties, a Tanarian general who was present at the battle ordered the remaining soldiers to retreat. The Tanarian army had once again gained another victory. After the battle, word had sent to Solomon saying that their invasion of Bulgaria was a success. Solomon was pleased that his plan for invading Bulgaria worked, and decided to let Ashra know of their success. Ashra, who would receive the word, would be ecstatic with pride and patriotism, and now that Tanarian soldiers have landed in Bulgaria, they could continue their campaign on Kejpt. As for the Budapestian fleet, there was that was there to protect Ashra's men from Allied ships, they were ordered by Solomon to split their formation in half because he wanted 2 of their ships to protect his men in Bulgaria from naval vessels. As for the Allies, they have conspired a plan to defeat the Budapestian fleet. Their plan is to send a couple of Bassagian plans to send a couple of Bassagian and Italian ships to confront the fleet guarding Egypt, and while Kandahar would send his air force to bomb the other ships in Bulgaria. Once the Budapestian fleet is demolished, they would launch a counter-offensive on their enemies. Suleyman Mustafa was proud of his first battles that he won, but he also knows that he has been losing casualties, and it could be a matter of time for the Allies to launch a counterattack. He told his advisor, Amit Arlan, that he is going to send some men to reinforce their unit in Bulgaria while he goes to catch up to lead Lieutenant Ashra's men, and he wanted him to be in charge while he was away. Amit agreed to Solomon's decision into leading his army personally, but he also worries that if Solomon dies, their dreams of reuniting an empire will be ruined. Solomon left his office and made his way towards one of the military bases to recruit some soldiers. After recruiting his new unit of men, and they hurriedly boarded their ship and immediately set sail. On Tuesday, July 16, 2024, at 12:51 p.m., a couple of days later, Solomon's ship were near the coast of Egypt, and as they were getting closer, they heard ship guns opening fire and planes flying over. It turns out that the Egyptian Air Force and the Italian fleet launched their attack on the Budapestian ships. Solomon immediately ordered the captain of his ship to send out their planes and cover the Budapestian ships with their guns. The battle resulted with Solomon's ship surviving with a few damages and the loss of 2 planes. As Solomon's ship lands on Egyptian soil, they began to deploy Solomon and his army of men that he brought to aid Ashra, and for the Budapestian fleet near Bulgaria, they had managed to survive the bombardment of Tanarian planes and Bassagian naval vessels. Now with the enemy's fleets and air forces destroyed, they could continue their land assaults on Egypt and Bulgaria. Ashra was surprised by Solomon's arrival, and he asked him why did he come to the war front. And he replied, saying, quote, "My dear boy, I want to lead my men into battle and make sure that our empire is built the way it's supposed to be. I want to prove myself, my country, and everyone around the world that I'm not afraid to die in battle while other leaders are sitting at their desks giving orders to their generals to carry them out, which would lead to their failure. And I don't want to be seen as a coward when it comes to a cause that is needed to help us, and as leader of Tanarian, I won't fail my people." End quote. After Solomon explained himself, Ashra asked him what is his plan, and Solomon told him that he would lead the men on their assault of Fort Tibler and Mesa. He wanted Ashra to take his unit and tanks, and 2 tanks that he supplied to help the other unit conquer Bulgaria and defeat the Allied forces there. Ashra ordered his men and the 2 tanks given to him by Solomon to be prepared to travel towards Bulgaria, and before they left, Ashra saluted to Solomon, wishing him luck on his conquest of Egypt. The Allies were now upset that their strategies aren't successful, decided to go with using their backup tactics, where they were trying to use guerrilla warfare to defeat their enemies. King Harold has planned on setting up an ambush along the road from Bulgaria's colony along the road from Bulgaria's colonies to the country of Morocco, in hope that he could prevent the Tanarians from supplying or reinforcing their unit in Bulgaria. Harold's tactics for Egypt are to launch a counter-offensive against the Tanarians and destroy Solomon's ship before they could resupply themselves. King Beto of Italy wants aid in Bassage's counter-offensive wants to aid in Basaja's counteroffensive by supporting their soldiers with their tanks and infantry. As for Azim Habib of Kejab, he wants his men to continue holding defense on the forts and cities while he sends his tanks and anti-tank vehicles to also take part on the counteroffensive. At 11:01 p.m., Solomon, it's supposed to be a.m., but okay. Solomon have already started to launch his assault on Fort Tibler. The battle for the fort resulted with Solomon's forces being defeated, and during the battle he almost died, but was luckily saved by his loyal army. He was angry that they lost, but he has decided to regroup his men and call for more reinforcements because he lost nearly a quarter of his unit, and if their enemies plans to launch a counterattack, he would like to have a position where they can defend. Since the beginning of Tanarian's invasion of Placica, the country of Bulgaria have been alarmed and had enacted a military defense plan on their country and their colonies to prevent them from being conquered by their enemies. But as the days went by, they haven't encountered any Tanarians and are considering whether they should sign a peace agreement with Tanaria while they have the chance, or continue their defense. And the leader of Bulgaria, President Zul, decided to continue their defense and continue to support their allies with supplies. As Lieutenant Ashra was on his way to Bulgaria, he received a call from Solomon telling him that his siege on Fort Tibler failed and he needed to call in reinforcements. Ashra told Solomon to not call any more reinforcements because he would be sending some of his men back to help them. Solomon thanked Ashra and ended the conversation. Ashra traveled his way towards Bulgaria for the past 2 days, taking a different route to avoid the Basajan ambush positions, and managed to arrive there sooner than he expected. After 2 days of camping near the city of Babdon, Ashra began to launch his invasion on Monday, July 22nd, 2024 at 1:16 p.m. The Bulgarian and Tanarian forces within the city tried their best to defend it, but were outnumbered and had to leave the city for their enemy to capture. Ashra was glad of his victory and decided to hold the city as a defensive position. As for Solomon and his forces, they were going to hold defense at Fort Tibur because they received information from one of their prisoners that the Allies are going to launch a counterattack against them. Solomon, who would later find out of Ashra's success of capturing the city of Babdon, ordered Ashra to make it as their defense position because he has confirmation that their enemies are going to launch a counterattack and to call off any more offensives. The Allies have managed to get their forces ready and are launching their massive counteroffensives the next day. On Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, at 1:20 p.m., the Allied forces charged at Solomon's forces held at Fort Tibur. Solomon's men fought the advancing forces with everything they had, from artillery to soldiers, fighting to the last man. The battle for Fort Tibur lasted an hour and 10 minutes, and Solomon's forces were being picked off very quickly. One of his generals, by the name of Hussein Setin, took Solomon out of the fort and told him to run for safety, while he and his remaining men were left to fight them off, to buy him time to escape. As Solomon ran from the fort, he would hear the screams of pain and agony from the general who saved him. The Allied forces captured the fort along with 4 prisoners, two Budapestians and Tanarians. As for General Satan, he was killed during the fight. Solomon looked back at the fort and pulled his binoculars to see what had happened, and there he would see the bodies of his men being piled on top of each other. And the final body that would be placed was Hussein's, and one of the Egyptian soldiers would burn the bodies. As he watched his fallen soldiers burn, he had a fire awaken inside him, and that fire would be of vengeance. He walked away from the fort in anger. but he would later calm down and would contact Ashra and tell him to regroup at their landing zone in Kegypt to discuss a new plan. As Ashra left the city of Babdan, the Kandaharian forces recaptured the Kandaharian forces recaptured it, and if Ashra hadn't left, Kandaharian forces captured it, recaptured it, and if Ashra hadn't left, they could have been killed or captured by the Kandaharian or Bajirian scouts. When Ashra met with Solomon, he began to explain his new plan. His new plan is to call in more reinforcements from their home country, Red Hot, and Budapest, along with some armor and aircraft support. Their aircraft, excuse me, guys. Their aircraft are going to bomb the capital cities of Bajiria and Kegypt, and once they are done bombing the cities, they would move in and defeat the Allied forces to where they surrender, and that way they could win the war. However, the reinforcements from Red Hot and Tanarian would take 2 days, but they could wait on the Budapestians to arrive. On Friday, July 26, 2024, the Budapestian units have arrived and are now on standby until their other units have arrived. On the evening of the 26th, Solomon's forces have arrived and could enact their battle plan. Solomon and Ashra are planning on launching their assault on the Bajirian capital Buja in the morning, and then in the evening they would launch their attacks in the Egyptian forts and then proceed to assault the capital of Tyro. On the morning of July 27, 2024 at 11:38 a.m., Solomon gave the order for his bomber division to launch their bombing raid upon the Allied defenses of the capital. The forces within the city scrambled to look for cover from the incoming bombs, but only a few men and one Kandaharian tank survived. Once the raid was over, Solomon ordered his infantry to charge and invade the city of Buja. The men who survived the bombing, manned their positions and began to open fire on the massive Tanarian force. The Tanarians, in return, would fire their guns, picking off the remaining defenders one by one until 8 men had enough and surrendered to them. Solomon ordered his men to bind their prisoners in cuffs and place them in one of their military prisons. Solomon would then call the leader of Bajiria and told him that he has captured the capital, and if he wants his soldiers and civilians spared, he must surrender to him and give up on the war. Solomon, fearing for the safety of his people, had to go with the deal of him surrendering the war in order to spare his people, and that he is surrendered, and that Kandahar has also decided to surrender to save the Bajirians and Kandaharian soldiers that were still lingering. Solomon was glad that Bajiria had given up along with Kandahar. He told President Lumiere of Kandahar that he would spare his army if he evacuated his forces from Bajiria, and once he wins the war, they could negotiate terms of peace. Okay guys, so this is the end of the video. It's very long, so I don't know if this will ever get posted on YouTube, but if it does, then it's a miracle. And I probably won't have to clip some things, but other than that, thank you guys for watching, and we'll continue on with the next episode of the war, which will be kind of the resolution.